Anytime we have supply and demand curves, our next step is to go ahead and see how our macroeconomic equilibrium changes when we have a single shift of supply and demand and then a simultaneous shift of supply and demand, so at the same exact time. And that's exactly where we're going to be going to. So if you haven't learned how to do these simultaneous shifts left, this is your penultimate or the second to last time that you're going to be seeing it for this semester. So once again, get a really good idea of how to do all these sort of shifts. Here we start off pretty simple. We have a supply and demand curve. We know what our equilibrium interest rate is equal to 3%. Equilibrium quantity of loanable funds is equal to 300. And suppose we take it easy. I just tell you that there's going to be one particular shift, and I say that your incomes are going to increase. Is this going to affect supply? Is this going to affect demand? Based on what we built up so far, you know that when incomes increase, it's going to be affecting the supply side of the market, because it affects people like you and I. As our incomes go up, we want to go ahead and save more money. And as we save more money, that's going to shift our supply curve over to the right. So here, we're putting more money into the banks. And as we save more money, put it into the banks, supply shifts outwards away from the origin. And we end up at a new equilibrium at point A, where our equilibrium interest rate drops from 3% to 2%, but the equilibrium quantity of funds goes up from $300 billion to $400 billion. So here, very easy, one single shift of supply, it could be one single shift of demand. These single shifts are things that you guys should be getting right away. However, we can always make this a little bit more complex. And how do we introduce this complexity? We introduce these simultaneous shifts. So one shift is going to affect demand, one shift is going to affect the supply, and then it's up to you to decide exactly which direction they're going to shift and find out what happens to our equilibrium interest rate and quantity of funds. So let's go ahead and do a very quick example of that just to get even more practice with this. So here, an example of these simultaneous shifts. Suppose that the first shock that I give you is that the government is going to reduce tax breaks. Government reduces tax breaks for savings. So tax breaks for saving. Shock number one. Shock number two occurs at the same exact time. Suppose that the government also is going to increase penalties. Government increases penalties. Let me spell this better. Penalties for corruption. For corruption. So two shifts, two shocks happening at the same exact time. Government reduces tax breaks for saving, and the government also increases penalties for corruption. And remember that for the rest of the semester, we're dealing with these simultaneous shifts that are of equal magnitude. So you're going to be drawing out both of these shifts in the same exact ratio or length. Here, we always want to start off with our benchmark case where we have D0, where we have S0, equilibrium point A right there. We know what our interest rate is. It's going to be R0, and the equilibrium quantity of loanable funds is LF0. So here we want to find out what happens in equilibrium to our two main variables that we see right here, and we're going to tackle this the same exact way that we've always been tackling it throughout this entire semester. Take each one of these shifts one by one. So shock number one, government reduces tax breaks for savings. Is this going to affect supply or is this going to affect demand? Well, the key word that you see right here is savings, so you know for sure it's going to be affecting supply. So if they reduce the tax breaks for savings, that's going to affect supply, and it's going to be affecting it in a negative manner. So supply is going to go down. You don't want to put as much money into the banks as you did before. So as supply goes down or decreases, we shift our supply curve over to the left. So here, shift it over to the left, we have S1 right here, our new supply curve. Shock number two, you know it has to affect demand. Remember that each of these shifts, one's going to affect supply, one's going to affect demand. So the government increases penalties for corruption. This is something that firms and corporations, they do like. So demand is going to be affected. In which direction? It's going to be a positive shock to our demand. So demand is going to increase. So as the government increases penalties for corruption, that's actually going to lower the cost of doing business. Lowers the business operations cost for firms and corporations. So demand is going to increase. So they want more funds, and they want more loanable funds within the marketplace. So they go to the banks and say, hey, give me loans. And as demand increases, we shift our demand curve away from the origin over to the right. We draw out D1 right here, we draw out in the same exact magnitude, the same exact ratio. And our new intersection is going to be where our new supply curve, our new demand curve intersect, and that's going to be at point B. And at point B, what do we notice about our equilibrium? Well, we know for sure that interest rates have shot up all the way from R0 to R1. So yes, interest rates are going to increase. So we can put that down. Interest rates for sure are going to increase. But what happens to the quantity of loanable funds? We know that the quantity of loanable funds is exactly the same as our original quantity of loanable funds at LF0 right here. So loanable funds, so we can say loanable funds, the quantity, so just to be sure about that, the quantity of loanable funds is going to remain the same. So remains the same, or it's indeterminate, or is unknown in this instance. So twofold effect that we see right here. Interest rates increase, loanable funds remains the same. And remember that one of our variables is going to be remaining the same, indeterminate, or unknown, because we are dealing with equal magnitude shifts. At least one of these variables are going to have to be unknown in this instance. So essentially we hit our new equilibrium. We shift our equilibrium from point A to point B now. So point B is our new equilibrium, and we end up with higher interest rates with the same amount of loanable funds. And as before, you do want to get as much practice as you can. There's basically an infinite number of combinations of these shifts that we can do based on the determinants that we drew up on the supply side, the determinants that we drew up on the demand side. And it's up to you, once again, to draw out these graphs and see exactly what happens in equilibrium to in the loanable funds market. With this in mind, we want to go ahead and turn our attention, or segue our attention, to the financial system and see exactly what the financial system's roles are going to play within the economy, and exactly take a closer look at the bond and stock market, as well as a little bit about your own personal finance in the next few videos and sections. So get a little bit more into finance in the next few sections. So I'll see you guys in those particular videos.